beginning of it. So when you're looking at potentially getting a divorce, you are starting to think about, what assets you have, what debts you have, and essentially where is a divorce going to, how is it going to end up essentially affecting you overall? Like, what are you going to walk away with?
Yep.
And are you going to be able to maintain the lifestyle that you've had, considering now there's going to be two separate households, whether or not one party worked or not? There's a lot that goes into what people think about as, okay, am I ready to make the move? And what does this whole picture look like for me at the end? So it's a lot of
flying high.
Yeah.
Typically. And so how do you go about kind of dissecting that and taking the emotional piece out and seeing if they can indeed and how they can move forward?
I try in the best way that I can, which is just kind of giving them knowledge so that they understand the process. I think that knowledge is power. So once you provide them with that knowledge, they just feel so much more at ease about the situation, knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But one of the big things that comes up, which is obviously a big asset typically in a divorce, is a house. So what happens? One person wants to keep the house, the other person wants to keep the house, but one of the spouses may not be able to keep the house. How do we know that either one of them can keep the house unless we know how much the house is worth? And so I think a big problem is, and this is something that I know that you know a lot about, and have extensive experience in, is the difference between an appraisal, the difference between different kinds of appraisals, and the difference between what a home would actually sell for. And it is absolutely, it's just crazy to me that judges don't really truly even understand that process at all. They don't understand that if we get an appraisal, that it doesn't mean that that property is going to sell for that. So it's very confusing. And then you get into the different kinds of appraisals and how that affects what the value of the home is and how that then compares to what it would actually sell for. So putting this number on this major, typically the number one asset,
Yes.
in case, is extremely important. And a lot of attorneys, I find, don't have any clue in the difference.
Yeah,
they're arguing it.
It's not their specialty, and they're not real estate attorneys, and that's why it's important to kind of all work together as a group and a team to be able to do that. I don't practice law, but I do real estate, and attorneys come to me and ask me the real estate points. I think an appraisal serves a great purpose of a snapshot in time, but it's that time, that day.
Yeah.
It's not 2 months later, and certainly not a year later. And one of the things that I find is that realtors have the ability to take the nuances of the property and the neighborhood and factor that in to a fair market value. So while we have our comps, we also know the schools. We know if it's, by a train or a highway. Is there a certain part of it that is so dated that buyers are not going to want to move forward? I mean, there's those little nuances, and some very big, that affect our fair market value. And so what I like to do with divorcing homeowners is give them kind of that fair market value snapshot, but continue the discussion over time and give updates to everybody as the market changes.
That's key. What you just said is absolutely beautiful. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. We're looking at a situation where there is a market and there's market values and changes in markets that people also don't seem to understand as we're trying to, list out on what I call a marital balance sheet, what this asset is going to be worth. Mm-hmm. So like you said, today it may be worth X. 2 months from now, the market changes, it could be worth Y.
Look at the pandemic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it is key that, you make sure that you have somebody like yourself, that clients have somebody like yourself that is able to kind of jump in and say, okay, here we are in this particular moment with this property, you'd be looking at approximately X.
Right.
And having you around to be able to then say, okay, now 2 months down the road, where are we? What does that mean for me? And what does that mean for this asset?
Exactly. And one thing I love about the way you work is that you try to bring me in from the beginning, which really helps instead of the end, when all the decisions have been made and people have an expectation that is just completely, it's just going to unravel, on so many levels. I've had situations where they have a number in their head and no one has addressed the fact, earlier on that if you're in a condo, that there might be a special assessment pending, and maybe it's coming up a year from now. But that year happens soon.
Oh, yeah. Goes
Sellers
fast.
are ultimately responsible, right? Or that deferred maintenance that doesn't get, taken care of. How is that going to affect the value? And are we going to address that, or are we selling it as is?